It's actually something that happened to my son a couple of weeks ago,
Okay.
and it kind of, been freaking me out a little bit. I'm a big, fan of the paranormal, but my son, he's 16, he's an absolute skeptic, and we live on in the Pocono Mountain, the end of a long dead end road up against 30,000 acres of game land. And he likes to go in the backyard at night. We'll have the lights on and he'll work on like he does wood burning or he does like welding, stuff like that.
Hmm.
And one night he came flying through the house and he ran into my husband's office. I overhear him talking and it's like, my husband's like, oh, it's just a bear. And, and since then he won't stay out after it gets dark. He'll go outside in the yard as soon as it gets dark because there's the lit part of the yard and then it's just darkness for 30,000 acres. And so after a couple of weeks, I was in the car with him. I'm like, hey, I noticed you haven't been going out, you haven't been staying out working on your projects after dark. What's going on? And he's like, well, Mom, I saw something. I'm like, oh, is this about the bear? And he got really quiet. And then you got to understand, he's an Eagle Scout. He's in Civil Air Patrol. He grew up in the woods hunting, fishing. Like he knows his animal. He knows his wildlife animals. And I said, well, what do you think it? Because he said it is not a bear. And well, what do you think it is? And he kind of went through like he was in his own mind, like, well, it was too big to be a raccoon or a coyote. It was too thin. It was like crouching out. And I said, well, what happened? And he's like, well, I'm working on my project and I hear a rustling in the bushes past the dark line of darkness. So I look at it and I see these two eyes looking back at me.
Hmm.
And he said the weird thing is most wild animals, if you maintain eye contact with them, they'll turn around and run away. Like they don't like it. This thing kept staring back at me. And I thought that was really weird. So I start taking a couple steps forward. And then all of a sudden, whatever it was, it just bolted up to a standing position and turned around and ran into the woods. And I said, oh, well, maybe it was like a bobcat because we do have those down here. They're rare, but that could be something I could see that would be in a crouching position and then get up and jump up. And he's like, it's not a bobcat and it's not a bear. And I said, well, how do you know? He's like, Mom, it took off running upright on 2 feet.
Hmm.
And he's like, if it wasn't for living in the middle of the woods, I said, well, what did it look the most like? Like, are we talking about Bigfoot? And he's like, no, it didn't have any hair. He's like, Mom, the closest thing I would say it looked like is like a skinny, pale crackhead running through the woods, but it wasn't making any noise. So it just really freaked me out because I've heard of stories because I follow like, you guys and a bunch of other podcasts. And like it sounds to me like a pale walker, I think they call it.
Like a skinwalker
Something
or
like well, I've heard, I mean, I'm not an expert, but I've heard skinwalkers actually transform it like from people to animals. But then I've heard of these like tail walkers that are like tall, skinny, pale creatures that are humanoid. Um, it almost like that urban legend, that creepypasta they talk about that tall, pale guy. I forget his name, but um, it's just my kid doesn't really dive into this stuff, so I'm like talking about it, and he doesn't know this stuff. Like he's the kid that when he's out with his friends with scouts and they're talking about, oh, I saw Bigfoot, he'll be the one to say, you saw a hunter wearing a ghillie suit, or they'll say, oh, I saw these 7 foot tall, glowing eyes in the woods staring at me, and he'll be the one to tell him it was an owl sitting on a tree branch. Like, he's the great debunker,
right.
but it's just
Have you
it
guys
really
talked
freaked
to
me out.
anyone? Have you talked to anyone in the neighborhood and shared the story?
No, because we don't really live in a neighborhood. Like we're pretty isolated.
Gotcha.
Um, and I think he doesn't really want to talk to his friends at Scouts about it because he's prided himself on being such a skeptic and debunking all of their stuff.
Right.
that, but I mean, this is a kid who has done endless like search and rescue training weekends in the Pocono Mountains, Boy Scout camping trips, and not just like little Cub Scout trips, but like 2 week long hardcore in the woods. And it's just funny to see like he still does those things because he has to when he's with a group,
Hmm.
but it must really be something that he can't shake because he'll go out in the backyard and like we have a third of an acre that's and then we have our backyard lit up. And then there's like this sharp line of darkness where it just goes into like endless woods. And it's funny because he'll be out there working on like a welding project or a wood burning. And as soon as it gets dark, he packs it up and comes in and
Wow.
works in the garage or puts it away.
Right. I don't blame him.
So I'm not a, we've only lived in Pennsylvania. We just moved here about 2 years ago, so I'm not as like we came out here for weekends and stuff, but now I'm trying to find out like what are the local legends. Like
Yeah.
some of the people in the town have said that Bigfoot lives out here, and I'm like, oh, well, Bigfoot lives everywhere. But
Right.
I
Yeah. It'd be
haven't heard anything
interesting.
about pale walkers or
It'd be
skinwalkers.
interesting to do research on on like in your area, just like in the wilderness alone. You could do it some online, but even I don't know if there's like a somehow somewhere a local library and looking through old, you know, I got to do this. I go to libraries and look through microfilm to find
Yeah.
certain words, keywords to give me more context on certain stories I'm hearing about. Sometimes it's like weird cryptid stuff, or sometimes it's like true crime stuff, because it's like information you can only find in a library or the local historian who's held on to stuff. And like I've talked to a lot of local historians, and they tend to have a lot of everything, and they might not believe in it, but they collect stories and weird, strange headlines, stuff like that. So it might be one thing, uh, both the Google and actual real world research.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't get a sense that it was like a haunted, like a ghost. It was
Mm.
like, it was just, I'm thinking some kind of cryptid, something
Yeah, that's what it sounds like for sure.
weird. But I'd never heard of like pale walkers or like you mentioned the
The skinwalker,
skinwalkers
yeah,
in the Northeast. I've always
right,
heard it being like a California or Southwestern thing.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like I was saying earlier, I think there's something strange out in these woods, all different types of things. On the other side of that, I also think there are people who live in the woods who are strange. Like they
Oh,
like hermits, like that was part of a legend near where I grew up in the Hudson Valley in New York. And they said there were like feral family, like a feral family that just looked like
oh,
animals, right? That lived in the mountain that, it was I forget, it was on the other side of this mountain called, this old town called Doodle Town. And, people, that was the legend. So I always had
yeah.
both those things in my mind. Like it could just be people who live in the woods that look freaky because they're people who live in the woods forever, or it's something unhuman.
Yeah, like I've done a deep dive on just podcasts about feral people in Appalachia down in like
Hmm.
Tennessee area. So
Hmm.
it's a little disconcerting to think that that could have reached this far north, but well,
Yeah.
maybe he's right. Maybe it was just some naked crackhead running through the woods.
Whatever it was, it sounds like an alarming thing to see for
Yeah,
sure. And
but
if you
and I just wanted to mention I've been a huge fan of your stuff for years, right? Way going back to like the Georgia Gold books
oh wow, thank you.
and the podcast before it got big. And the one thing like I we lived for 20 years on Long Island, and you are 100% right. Long Island is a very dark, weird, evil place.
I was born
And
there. Yeah, I know.
uh,
It was it's a weird place.
I don't want to be a time hog, so I'll call in again for the stories related to Long Island, but I'll just leave it at this. We actually did live in Amityville around the
Ooh.
corner. My son had play dates in the boathouse of the house, so that's creepy.
Yes.
And it's an even longer story. I'll call in one another time, but talk about 6 degrees of separation because they arrested the Gilgo Beach, serial killer.
Hmm.
That indirectly ended up leaving me in solitary confinement in prison for 24 hours. It was all just a huge bunch of computer errors, they said. So
Oh man.
that's,
Okay. Well, you have
but,
to
and
call
there's just,
back.
it's weird. It's a weird, and I'm not from there. I
Hmm.
never want to go back there. I spent 20 years there. That's long enough, but it is like a weird, dark, evil place.
Yeah, something's wrong with that place. Thank you for the kind words, and please do call back because we want to hear the rest of this.
Yeah. Okay.
Have a good
All
night.
right. Well, thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye.
Good night.
Long Island. It'll haunt me for the rest of my life.
More like Wrong Island.
Ooh, nice.
Zinga.